Konnichiwa! In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at a publisher that created some of the greatest games for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Konami. My name's Mike, and this is the Retro Gamer Boy Show. Now, Konami created some of the best games for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look a little bit at the history of Konami and Sega's relationship and looking at the complete catalogue of Konami games released for the Genesis and Mega Drive. But before we get into that, if you're a fan of retro gaming, you love your games, you love your Sega games, then why not consider subscribing by clicking on a little icon just below the video. And if you want to go that little bit further and show off the passion you have for a certain retro gaming console, then you can check out our Pixel Perfect t-shirt line. Links for where you can find these in the description below. Now, Konami's relationship with Sega goes all the way back to the SG-1000, when Konami joined Sega as its first third-party publisher. It published a total of 10 games on the platform, but none of them developed by Konami themselves. They were all licensed games from various different developers. At the same time, Nintendo's entertainment system was about to come onto the market and be one of the biggest selling consoles ever. And because of this, Nintendo and Konami forged a relationship that would last throughout the 16-bit era and would put the Sega Master System and Mega Drive a little bit to one side. But Konami hadn't completely left the relationship with Sega behind. In fact, it developed a total of 16 games that were released for the system. It also published one game in Europe from another developer, and there were 2 games that didn't make it to market. One where a publishing deal fell through, that was for Turrican of all games, and the other for a game that was cancelled, and that was Biker Mice from Mars. Nintendo's success with its 8-bit NES console meant that Konami and Nintendo were bound to the hip as they entered the 16-bit era. But Sega had established a commanding lead in the 16-bit console space. Released 2 years before Nintendo's offering, it was a powerhouse of a machine and was dominating markets in Europe and Japan. Now, Konami couldn't ignore this, especially as the console was billed as the arcade machine at home. Arcade classics from Sega were making themselves onto Sega's brand new 16-bit machine, and Konami decided to test the waters with an arcade game of their own. The first game to release from Konami on the Sega Mega Drive was the stunning Sunset Riders, one of my all-time favourite arcade games. But they were cautious. They released the game on a 4 meg cartridge, the smallest cartridge you could put out on the Sega Mega Drive. Now, Sunset Riders did also make it onto the Super Nintendo a year later, but that had a whopping 8 meg in the cartridge. And so when you compare the 2 titles next to each other, of course the Mega Drive falls down. But saying that, Sunset Riders is a stunning game on the Sega Mega Drive. It was an amazing implementation and a huge technical feat considering the amount of RAM they used for the game. Now, Nintendo reaped the rewards of signing an exclusivity deal with Konami in the early NES days. Titles like Castlevania and Contra were coming across to the new platform, which meant that the Mega Drive couldn't take direct ports of these games onto its platform. But Konami saw the huge amount of potential and money left on the table by not making games for the Sega Mega Drive. And so we saw 3 games that were exclusive on the platform, or 3 series that were exclusive on the Super Nintendo platform, make their way as brand new games on the Sega Mega Drive, getting around that exclusivity deal they had with Nintendo. We saw Contra Hard Corps, which was called Probotector in Europe. We saw Castlevania New Generation in Europe and Castlevania Bloodlines in the States. And we saw a kind of port of Turtles in Time make its way onto the Sega Mega Drive with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Hyper Heist. All 3 of these games, or at least the IPs, were exclusive to Nintendo. It meant that the games had to be completely rebuilt for the Sega Mega Drive. They couldn't be carbon copies. And so we saw a kind of port of Turtles in Time make its way onto the Sega Mega Drive. There were aspects of Turtles in Time that made it into the game. There were less levels, but they were longer. There was more aggressive AI and a brand new story to go along with it. Castlevania Bloodlines, or Castlevania New Generation, is a stunning game, visually amazing. The sound is fantastic. Konami really knew how to make games, not only for their arcade machines, but for all the consoles as well. They produced some of the best game series ever made that still continue today. And then Contra Hard Corps or Probotector here in Europe was a fantastic addition to the series, and again had to be completely designed from the ground up to get around that exclusivity deal. Now, whilst Japan and the US remain two of the biggest markets for gaming, there was a third market that was growing exponentially and would eventually become one of the biggest markets in the world, and that was Europe. But there's a big problem with developing games for the European market. Unlike Japan or the States, where they're single territories, maybe 1 or 2 languages to convert for, and universally single laws that they had to comply to, Europe had a ton of languages and a ton of different laws that applied to those territories. It made developing games a lot harder, and so you would often see games coming out in Japan and North America way before, a year, 2 years before they'd come out into Europe. And that was because of localization and changes that need to happen. And one of these games that was most affected from Konami was Contra Hard Corps. Now, Germany has some of the strictest guidelines when it comes to video games. Violence is a big problem for them, and especially violence amongst humans in video games is a big problem. Because of this, Contra Hard Corps couldn't make its way to Europe in its original form. It had to change. It couldn't have that human violence in the game because of Germany's strict laws. And Germany was the second biggest market behind the UK at the time. And so all the characters were changed to robots. And because they changed the characters to robots, the name of the game also changed. Now, Probotector and Contra are almost identical. There's a couple of variations in some of the levels, and of course the characters are different. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same. The Mega Drive and the Genesis also enjoyed an exclusive and one of the most amazing platform games ever developed for the system. Konami released Rocket Knight Adventures, an exclusive for the Sega 16-bit console, and only its sequel would make it onto the Nintendo platform. Rocket Knight Adventures is one of the best platform games ever developed. Visually stunning, some amazing sound, and the game design in it was absolutely brilliant. They switched it up with a number of different mechanics, and the boss fights were so different when we compare it to games like Sonic, where the mechanic was relatively simple and the same. We saw Rocket Knight Adventures employ different ways, different patterns to defeat enemies. It is without doubt one of the jewels in the Sega Genesis gaming catalogue. Now, at the top of the show, we said there were 16 games developed by Konami and 1 that was published. So a total of 17 games on the Genesis and Mega Drive. Now, the only game to be published and not developed by Konami was released just in the PAL territories. And that was Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing. There was also a Japan exclusive game that came out early on in the Mega Drive's life cycle, and that was a puzzle game called Junction. Now, my Konami collection isn't complete yet, and the main reason for that is because Konami's games are some of the most expensive on the system. Now, most of the games that we've got here are the cheaper ones. They're around, I don't know, $15, $20. But there are some in here that are really expensive. We've got Turtles Hyperstone Heist, which will cost you about £120. That's what, $150. But the really expensive games like Contra or Probotector, they are astronomically expensive. In fact, some of the most expensive games that you can buy on the Mega Drive system, commanding £250, £300 easily for some of these titles. And so, whilst the collection isn't complete, it is going to take me a while to collect the remaining games. So, what are the games that we had on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis? Well, we've already covered Sunset Riders as the first game released for the console. We then got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Hero Turtles here in Europe, Hyperstone Heist, an awesome kind of arcade port of the original game. We got Tiny Toons Buster's Hidden Treasure, an absolute hidden gem of a platform game. If you liked the original NES version that we had, this game is even better, visually amazing, and that's one of the underlining traits of any Konami game. The games just look stunning. They had some of the best artists working on their games at Konami. There was of course the stunning Rocket Knight Adventures, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, or just Zombies here in Europe. It's an amazing top-down kind of adventure action game which sees you and another player, a two-player game, running around trying to find objects to help you escape and defeat the zombie horde. We got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. Now this game isn't a great fighter. In fact, it's a pretty poor fighter, but it's a stunning looking fighter. If they could have just got some of the fighting mechanics a little tighter, a little better, this could have been an absolute gem of a game on the platform. We got Lethal Enforcers, and this was from the arcade game, which used that photorealistic treatment to it. But bring it over to the Mega Drive with its limited palette of colours, it didn't fare very well. But the game was a lot of fun, especially playing it with the Enforcer gun here. And you could get a second two-player gun that plugged in to the bottom of the original blue Enforcer. This was followed up with Lethal Enforcers 2 Gunfighters. There was Hyper Dunk or Double Dribble in the States, a basketball game, more arcadey. Now a lot of people don't like this, they prefer NBA Jam, but I quite enjoy Hyper Dunk. It is very arcadey and pretty simple, there's not too much of a challenge there. Castlevania Bloodlines or Castlevania New Generation, a stunning game in the series, and it can be easily dismissed when you look at the amazing games that were available on the Super Nintendo and the NES. But this game in its own right stands up to those and is one of the absolute gems in the series. Tiny Toon Adventures Acme All-Stars is another game where it's visually amazing, but the gameplay is relatively simplistic. It involves you playing either soccer or football or basketball, so two little sports games. There is a story mode in it where you can go through and follow the characters, and I'd say it's more of a kids game. It was aiming at that market. But for what it is, it was well implemented. Contra Hard Corps or Probotector. Now we've already talked about this, but another stunning game, just like Castlevania, amazing. It stands up to its brethren on the Nintendo systems as one of the all-time greatest Contra games. It's not the greatest, but it's up there with them. Sparkster, and this was the sequel to Rocket Knight Adventures. Now unfortunately, this didn't manage to improve on the original. The original was so much better than its sequel Sparkster, but it doesn't mean it was a terrible game. It's just different. Still fantastic. They changed the art style up a little bit, they made it a little bit more edgier, and there were some great gameplay mechanics in there. Animaniacs, another platform game, and again Konami's artists pull off a stunning recreation from this Warner Brothers IP. It's a good little platformer game, not too long, pretty short, but the mechanics they've got in there of the three characters and being able to switch between them to use their special moves is a great mechanic to have within the game. It sometimes really makes you think about which character you need to lead with. And finally, International Superstar Soccer. This game was absolutely amazing. Now it's better known for its Super Nintendo incarnation, but the Mega Drive game is absolutely fantastic. In its own right, it is one of the best, if not the best, football game on the platform. Despite FIFA being dominant at the time, this would end up being one of the best games released, one of the best sports games released for the console. So there we go, Konami on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis. Not the largest publisher on the platform or the most prolific when it came to releasing games, but it did release some of the best games ever to grace the Mega Drive and Genesis, and currently some of the most expensive games that you can buy on the platform. If you've enjoyed today's show, why not join the community we have here at the Retro Gamer Boy Show? You can catch up with our brand new episodes every Monday by making sure you click on the little bell just below this video. And if you can't wait until our next show, then you can check out our huge back catalogue of retro gaming videos, 2 of which you can find over here. Yeah, I'm not falling over with this stuff in my hand.